you.
Next slide, please, Andy.
That's the one. Thank you. Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Kevin, part of the ASRC. This slide came about as a result of some of the comments that we had from previous meetings like this. Bit of an overview about candidate preparation. We've got plenty of information about what to do in the test, but there's plenty of work to do before the test. So don't forget the role of your instructors. Explanation, demonstration, evaluation, and practice. And that is both practical on the flying side and also practical testing of knowledge around questions. Really, really important. What about your examiner? Again, they should be involved in explanation of the process, and that's pre-test. Evaluation post-test, and if anything there needs to change or be improved, or anything that's done exceptionally well, then they should comment on that for you. Mock tests are great for experience. Don't be afraid of having to go to mock test. That will determine whether you're ready and what your instructor thinks and your examiner in terms of your being able to complete the test. Role of the candidate: awareness of test requirements, awareness of test standards, awareness and knowledge of safety, and that is safety and CAA mandatory requirements. You do need to know plenty about that. Practice, 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 and then when you think you've got it right, a little bit more practice. Bad weather we had before, don't forget simulators may be able to help you. Practice a manoeuvre, stay sharp until you can actually take the test itself. Help and guidance, all of the above really, instructors, examiners, club officials. Don't forget official publications, and there's information out there which include quizzes, which are a very good way of getting the candidate to speed with information. Of course, your area chief examiners and the ASRC, we're always here, we're on the end of the internet, we're more than willing to help you. So, bit of schoolwork before you get into the practical side. Thank you for that. I will now hand you back over to Charlie. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you. Evening, everybody. Name's Charlie Cox, ASRC member. This is the first one I've ever done, so be gentle with me. And if I talk too fast, just shout back at me and I'll slow down a bit.
They're all muted. They won't. They can't shout back.
Can we go back a slide, please, Andy?
Yeah, go on.
Oh, no, go forward. You're gonna... Okay, the overview. The test for an A certificate can be taken by any examiner. In the case of this particular test, the test has to consist of 2 flights, and the candidate must successfully complete the test in 1 attempt. The manoeuvres must be completed in the order specified, and a maximum of two attempts at the examination may be permitted in only 1 day. Usually, if you can't get it right first time round, give it a little bit of time and have a bit more practice before you go back for your second time. There's no great pressure to do it, and you get 2 attempts in a day, so why not? Okay. Next one, please, Andy. The A certificate is a measure of flying ability and safety which may be equated to a safe solo standard of flying. The A certificate is often used by clubs as a measure of your flying ability, and once you've got your A certificate, a lot of clubs will then let you fly solo, and quite often they won't let you beforehand. In my club, that is exactly how it is. And the basic proficiency certificates are not applicable to silent flight. Okay, next one please, Andy. Any electrical powered glider is suitable, but not electrical sports models. I think that speaks for itself. Electric powered models are live as soon as the battery is connected. For you guys who are flying electric gliders, you should already know this. I would expect you to. It's surprising how many people connect and then very, very surprised that a prop goes off in front of them. And obviously the last point is that a model must be suitable to fly the manoeuvres required by the test. Next slide. I'll hand over to Andy for this one.
Yeah, yeah. This was put into the standards booklets a few years ago after we found out that a certain individual who was charging people to teach them how to fly was then taking them for tests afterwards. But the tests were all conducted by using a buddy lead because he was using his own equipment and he didn't want them crashing his aeroplane. We were surprised we had to put it in the book, but that's why it's there. It's, you know, it sort of leaves you wondering the thought process of anybody thinking it's acceptable to take a test on a buddy lead. So, right, back to you, Charlie.
Well, we've got a question first from Bill Scott, is it?
Yes, Bill, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I just wonder if you've got the ability to kill the throttle in your transmitter or via a switch on the model. Can you connect the battery before you go out, or is it still, it has to be, you have to wait till the last minute?
My view is that you need to wait till the last minute because you have to prove the switch works. And to do that, you're better off out the front as opposed to in the gates.
Okay, cheers.
Would anybody argue with that?
Well, no, I think the other thing is that it doesn't matter to us. I mean, I always leave my connection to the battery until the last minute, but it doesn't matter when you connect it within reason, so long as it's safe and compliant with club rules and BMFA rules. But the most important thing is, as soon as you have connected, you have to assume that the model is live and behave accordingly. So I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, and discuss it with your examiner before you
Sure.
start the test. I think that's the important thing as well.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, Charlie.
Okay, thank you. Right, on to the test itself. Height, speed and positioning. All manoeuvres flown in the area agreed prior to the test. You need to speak to your examiner and you need to agree between you, or point out between you, where the safe flying zones are compared to where you are. Sometimes your examiner won't know or won't be completely familiar with the area you're in, and you need to work out between you where you can and can't fly and where you intend to launch and land. The landing area and approach pattern should also be agreed before you go, which is the same thing. And you must bear in mind that good speed control with gentle loss of height and no unnecessary height loss when you're gliding. That's the whole idea of gliding, I believe. Next one, please, Andy. To start off with, you carry out your pre-flight checks as required by the BMFA safety codes. That is all written down for you. You know what you have to do with it, assuming you've read all the guidance beforehand. You do your flying session checks and assume that the test flight is the first flight of the day. You may have been there for an hour or so practicing, but for the test, please assume it's the first flight of the day. And you need to check the member's handbook and pay particular attention to airframe, control linkages, surfaces, anything else that you could think of with your model. And most importantly, please don't forget to check the failsafe. Next one, Andy. Prepare for a launch. You will clear, depending upon your club rules, of course, you clear the frequency control system. And then you need to go through and demonstrate that you've gone through the correct power on sequence. Part of that is once you're on, demonstrate your motor start control in sequence to the examiner. Next one, please, Andy. The launch. Check launch and landing areas are clear on the ground and in the air. That goes without saying, really. And you need to tell everybody what you're doing. Again, in my club, a good shout all around you is the norm, so that everybody knows what you're doing. And once you've launched, any deviation should be corrected smoothly and quickly. Sometimes when you launch a glider, you have a quick couple of seconds fiddling about getting yourself sorted. Once you're away, climb to approximately 400 feet and switch off your power, and then transition to the glide without stalling. And that's quite important when you're watching somebody with a glider. People do launch a glider, send it up to a height, turn the motor off, and the first thing you do is stall, and then try and sort themselves out from there. Next one. Okay, to stall. No power is to be used during the next 3 manoeuvres. It's a glider, these are glider actions. Stall the model into wind and recover with minimum loss to height. With the right model and with some practice, most gliders have a very benign stall and you sort yourself out quite quickly, and then you can recover to your original track in a smooth, controlled and timely manner. The next part is the free thermal turns. In my experience, 3 thermal turns, they either work or they don't. However, you perform 3 consecutive 360 turns, either left or right, and finish on the same track as you went in on, or entry as it says there, again with a minimum height loss. At the same time, you try not, well, you can't stall it, and you certainly don't want to end up in a dive. It takes a little bit of practice. Ian? Ian's got a question?
You should be able to unmute yourself, Ian.
Oh.
I've unmuted him. There you go.
It's a good.
Can you describe a thermal turn to me, please? Because I've got a couple of candidates that want to do a slope A test, and it's sort of very similar to the slope. So, what is a thermal turn? Can you describe it?
It's written in the handbook quite nicely, actually, Ian. It should be a good steady turn. It doesn't have to be a complete and accurate circle, and you can drift slightly with the wind. It has to be a suitable turn to keep you in a thermal without tipping out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Because there's no diagrams of it, is there?
No. I don't know what the other guys think, but usually when you're trying to stay in the thermal, you kind of make it up as you go along to a point, do you not?
It tends to be a flatter circle, doesn't it? It's less of the bank and yank that you would do with a powered model.
Is it more like a rudder coordinated turn then?
Yeah.
And it's reasonably tight because in theory you're trying to stay in a thermal.
Yeah. Okay, so basically it's just a turn on the rudder rather than ailerons?
Both.
It's a combination of both, Ian.
Both, yeah.
Okay, all right.
I always tell people that when you're trying to stay in a thermal and turn at the same time, you actually learn how to use your rudder more than your ailerons.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else? No. Next slide, please, Andy.
Next slide.
Oh, hang on, before we go any further, John Minchell.
Yeah, when you said on that previous slide, you said do the 3 turns with minimal loss of height. If there aren't any thermals around and you're flying in a big pile of sink, you are going to lose height on 3 turns. What's the thinking from the examiner's point of view? If he says, right, do your 3 turns now when you're in a big pile of sink, can you fly off to a different part of the sky and find a thermal? Do you need to do it in a thermal or in just neutral air or whatever?
It doesn't need to be. It doesn't matter that it's not in a thermal because you can't guarantee that thermals are going to be present. And I think it's very much down to the examiner's judgment on the day, dependent on the weather conditions. For me, what I would look to see, I would accept a height loss provided it's not an obvious spiral dive. If it is just that the conditions are there's no real lift around, and that, to be honest, that's not uncommon, then so long as the model isn't stalled or in a spiral dive, I'm quite happy if there's a little bit of height loss in the turn because it's just unavoidable. And as to going somewhere else in the sky, that's possible so long as it's within the area of the flying area that you agreed with the examiner in the first place before exams.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else got anything?
Yeah. There's a question from Tony Hollings. Sorry, Ron Willits first.
Yeah. Good evening, gentlemen. I think my chatted question was fairly well covered by the previous chap, and the answers there. That on launch, if you find yourself after you've come out of the ascent on power and transition to glide, whether or not you are going to find a thermal to continue your 3 turns. But I think it was previously answered, so that's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ron. Sorry, Ron, we've just had Tony Hollings with a question from.
Hello, yeah. I was just a bit worried, really, when I heard somebody say thermal in is a flat turn with plenty of rudder. I mean, I fly full-size gliders, and that, to me, just sounds like a recipe for a spin. To keep I know why you do it. They expose the wing area to the thermal bubble, but it just sounds horrible. It's not something I'd ever practice.
I don't think it was meant as a full rudder turn. It's meant as a balanced turn, and I teach people to use the rudder in a turn just to keep the turn and the nose. It's a balancing act, isn't it, between ailerons and rudder and elevator for that matter.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to come across as a full rudder turn.
No.
Because then you will, as you say, tip yourself in and you're in trouble before you know it.
Yeah. I mean, thermal in me, 60 degrees usually, and then see where you are, get it cranked over.
Yep.
Come on, we all do it.
All right,
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, okay. I think we're all slightly different, Tony.
Well, in full size, it is a fairly aggressive manoeuvre, and actually, you could not unusual to have cross controls in the turns.
You hold off the ailerons.
Yeah, yes, yeah. You end up with quite a lot of rudder in the turn and an almost opposite aileron. So, anyway,
watching the string. Yeah. Sorry, yeah. Go on.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, there's David Stevenson.
Guys, just asking about if you're only using an RES model, rudder elevator spoiler type model, compared to a full house, you won't have the ailerons. What's the score there?
Well, again, it's a reasonably tight turn. It can't be flat in that case.
Correct.
And you're just the most important thing is that you don't stall in the turn or it doesn't develop into a spiral dive. I think that's the critical.
It's really you're just looking for a controlled,
correct,
controlled
turn.
Really.
Yeah.
Okay. That's no problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then with another question from Robin. Are you there, Robin?
Yeah, I'm here. I tend to fly on a rather windy site, and previously when I've been instructed, I was always told when I was trying to do thermal turns to do it tight to stop yourself going too far downwind. I mean, it's not abnormal for us to have 20 mile an hour winds on the flying field. So not the best conditions for thermaling, but that's what we live with.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that what you're expecting is somebody not to drift too far downwind?
Yeah, and keep it in control.
Yeah.
Just to prove that you can actually keep the turn on and control the model properly.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Anybody else, Andy?
No, that's all the questions currently answered.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Right then, the test. Prepare for the overshoot landing. From this point on, power should be used as required. Fly your model upwind to prepare for an overshoot landing phase. Again, no tendency to stall or minimum loss of height. Position isn't critical, but should be in the previously agreed area. Move on, thank you. At this stage, I would expect somebody to be checking the landing area is clear and calling for landing, and then completing a downwind and base leg and a final approach. All in your good time. You don't have to rush any of this, and adjust your circuit position and speed accordingly. Again, making sure that you are completely in control. Andy? It is an overshoot, it's not a landing. So from below 10 feet, we expect you to apply some more power, nice and smooth, from below 10 feet and climb back to the circuit height. The approach should be at a normal landing speed, but this is an aborted landing, not a low pass. and the model should return to normal circuit height and position. The landing approach, again, go through the same procedure again, check the landing area is clear, call landing, complete your downwind leg, your base leg, your final approach, adjusting your circuit position and speed accordingly. And then land the model into wind within 20 meters of your pre-discussed landing spot with your examiner. We are looking for a smooth landing. We don't want you to dive into the ground. No lawn darts, please. A steep approach is acceptable if you've got the air brakes and you don't build up excessive speed. My air brakes get used all the time, to be perfectly honest. And the landing should be a nice round out and a nice smooth arrival. Got another question?
Yes, that's Robin again.
Yeah, I think my question was probably answered by almost the last few statements there, which was, I was told by somebody who had tried to take the test and failed some years ago that you weren't allowed to use flaps or air brakes during the test, which just sounds totally wrong to me, as they're just another means of controlling the model.
Yeah.
I assume you're allowed to use them.
You are,
Yeah,
yes.
of course you are. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, right, that's what I thought. It seemed very strange.
Yeah. Well, I'd be lost without air brakes myself.
It's rather, I mean, it's one of the reasons we do things like this, but there's an awful lot of old wives' tales and urban myths out there surrounding so many of the tests, actually. So it's good to be able to clear that one up.
Okay, thank you.
Next one, please, Andy. The retrieval. You then need to safely remove your model and equipment from the takeoff landing area and inform all the other fliers that the landing area is now clear. And a question for the floor is, will you be taking your transmitter with you? Any takers?
Oh, they're all muted.
We unmute them all just briefly.
Yes.
Well, they can unmute themselves if they've any comments on that. Yeah, go for it.
Yes, yes, I would take my transmitter.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Have we got mainly yeses?
Yes.
That's fine. Yes.
Yeah, mostly yeses now.
Not
Yeah.
if I was on 35 meg.
Yeah, no, not if it was on 35 meg. Correct. Yeah.
For modern 2.4 gig with electrical systems, you're far better off taking your transmitter with you. Okay.
Is that different to the standard fixed wing A test?
No, they're all the same now.
Right.
Okay.
It was just one thing I'd noticed on a previous previous one of these, and it sort of seemed odd to me that you wouldn't take your controller to always have positive control of your model.
No, it's been this way for several years. Since the advent of 2.4, what we've said is you should discuss it and agree it with the examiner before the test. And also, obviously, it has to be compliant with whatever local rules. So there are still some clubs out there that want to keep all operating transmitters in the same area. But with 2.4 equipment, there is no technical issue, whereas with 35 megahertz, there was. So with 2.4, we think it's actually a lot safer if you do take the transmitter with you. And that's what I've just described, that sort of wording, is now in all the guidance documents for all the tests. So it's common across all scheme tests. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Cool, no problem.
Next slide, please, Andy. You complete your post-flight checks as laid down in the BMFA safety codes. A smooth landing only requires a visual check and a control movement check. If it's nice smooth landing, there's no need to do anything else. Next slide, please, Andy. Because as long as everything is okay, you're going to repeat the above test to give you a total of 2 flights. Obviously, that only applies if sufficient power remains in your batteries. The second flight can be done immediately, but if you need to, you can return to the pits, change your batteries, and then start again. When your second flight is completed, again, go through the procedure, clear frequency, the control, and return to the pits. So again, please, Andy. from that point on, as long as everything's gone all right, everybody's happy, and I'm sure it will be, you get your 5 mandatory questions and your 5 supplementary questions. Anybody who's going to take a test should know that these are coming, and I would hope that you'd have looked at the handbook. So we don't expect you to answer the questions parrot fashion, but we expect you to know where to go with the questions and to answer them sufficiently. Andy? Finally, try not to be nervous. It's a hobby. We do this for fun. And if you're prepared, it shouldn't be that hard. But to help you along, as with Ken's first slide, please do read the Standards and Guidance booklet and watch the video, where in this case it's not available, and read the Members Handbook. All the information you need is in there. And I do know that because I've read it. Any questions?
Everybody's free to unmute themselves. Ask away. Well done, Charlie, by the way.
Yeah, well done, Charlie.
Yeah.
Welcome.
So the second flight is identical to the first flight. All the elements of the first flight have to be repeated.
Yes.
Correct.
One quick question I have. After the first flight, if you're going to immediately do the second flight,
I think Robin muted himself there.
You've muted yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, but that noise is gone, so you know who was making it.
It's Ron that's a bit crackly. So.
I have a quick question about the post-flight checks after the first flight. As part of the normal post-flight checks, after I've checked everything out, one thing I would always do would be to disconnect the battery. But if you're going to do the second flight immediately, I'm assuming that it's okay to leave the battery connected.
Yes.
Yeah, if it's a perfect landing and you know full well that you haven't broken anything, bent anything, damaged anything, and your model is still in perfect condition, there's no reason why you shouldn't.
Right. Okay.
A question from Lek.
Does the power glider test have to be done at a power field, or can it be done from a slope site as well? Because we've clubbed with sites all over the place.
It's not. I would suggest a slope site isn't really suitable because it's a thermal test, and also some slope sites don't allow electric powered models. So
right, okay.
I mean, it is aimed to be a flat field test, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we'll bring Ron back in.
Yeah, hi guys. I've got rid of my microphone. Maybe that was a maybe that's got rid of the crackle.
That's much better, actually. Yeah, much better.
Yeah, I think it may have been my headset. Okay, so most of the gliders, and certainly the e-gliders that I fly, I don't use any type of switching. I tend to be straight from power to ESC, and don't have any switching. So when I do prep whichever glider I'm flying to get ready to fly, my batteries are connected to either the ESC, or if it's a non-E machine, to the battery ready for slope launch. But the hatches I tend to put on then are taped in place so they don't come off. But I do have a complete throttle kill on my transmitter. Would that be deemed as permissible as a safe method of switching? So live in the battery to the ESC, but the motor cut is on my transmitter in a two-stage process. Actually, I use a two-stage method of doing that. I appreciate the model is still live, but obviously with the due diligence of knowing my machine, obviously agreeing that with an examiner prior to any launch.
That's absolutely fine. The most important thing is once you've connected the battery, that model has to be treated as if it's live. So if you're connected to the battery and you're holding the model, you're around the back and you're going to launch, that's all good. But what you couldn't do is connect the battery and put it down in the pits and go away and have a chat. That's not right. You understand? So it doesn't matter what system you have, so as long as you discuss it and talk the examiner through it, but you have to treat, as soon as the power battery is connected, the model has to be treated as if it was live. It's like an IC, like when a model with an IC engine that's running.
Correct. And that's the protocol we adopt. That's good. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. We have a question here from Peter Brown.
Hi. Could someone define what a sports model is? Because I've been flying something that is made quite sporty, but it is a glider. It is an electric glider, but it just, I'm not sure whether or not it fits into the category for using on the test.
I suppose if it's capable of doing the test as defined, yes, it does. It's the short answer, really.
Okay, so what would be a sports glider then? In fact, what would not qualify to be used on a test then?
For this type of test, things like an electric acrowatt, for example, would be more appropriate for the fixed wing power test. It's not an appropriate model for the silent flight test.
Okay.
I think that's the main defining point. It's got to be an electric glider. In effect.
Okay. Well, what I've been using for about the last 18 months is an effect electric glider, and so from that point of view, I think it can be used on the test.
Thanks, Andy.
That's fine. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are some electric sports models that, I used to have a thing like a Graupner Race Rat, which was an electric pylon race model, which it didn't have an undercarriage and everything. It looked like a glider, but it clearly wasn't a glider. It was just an out-and-out speed machine, and that's not really suitable for taking something like this. But
I think, didn't John have your hand up a moment ago? John Michel?
Yeah, I did. It was just a point following on from Ron, I think, which was that Jetty and Emcotech now have high current, high power onboard switches, which are controlled by a magnetic key from outside the model, which totally isolate the power from the ESC and the motor. But they're hugely expensive, and the F5B lads sort of look at them rather than just having this an isolating switch on your transmitter, which still relies on the radio link between the TX and the RX. These are an onboard switch, which means that the motor is isolated. So going back to Duncan's point about treating the model as live, once the battery's plugged in, that's a sort of a halfway house, which is a bit of an anomaly. But if you're talking some of the lads with really 12 and 16 cell power setups in 6 and 7 meter scale gliders, they're using these things because you really don't want to get your hand inside about 2 or 3 kilowatts of motor turning a 20-odd inch prop. So from a safety point of view, they use those on board, which is not quite the from the answers that you were giving us for this test. But I guess you wouldn't be taking an A test with a glider like that, really.
It's unlikely, but possible. The tests are designed to be as inclusive as possible. But I understand what you're saying. But those systems are, like you say, they're expensive and they're not that common. But I think what you'd have to do is kind of convince the examiner on the day and talk him through it. But if the examiner was unsure or unhappy, I think you would have to go with the actual physical connecting of the battery as being the final.
Yeah, fair comment. I just wanted to make.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Fair dues. It's a good point to make.
Anything that's slightly out of the ordinary is something that should be discussed with the examiner as part of the pre-flight briefing, which is a very important part of the test. And there should be. The examiner should be talking the candidate through all the tests and what he's looking for. But it is the opportunity for the candidate to ask questions before the test if there's anything he's not sure about. It's a vital part of the test.
Yeah, and the examiners, they're not ogres. A good dialogue, I think, is fantastic. It's really good to be able to. I mean, and it gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling. I get quite comfortable if I've got a candidate that is prepared to talk me through all of those sort of things. I think that's really good.
Yeah. Question from Ron.
Yeah, really, it's more a statement as an extension on the sort of the type of glider, really. Certainly, my first dalliance into gliding was with what was loosely termed a warm liner, a foam ST Models Blaze, which, yes, electric glider and, you know, performed very nicely, but wouldn't thermal, really. And so, you know, if you tried using that model to kind of bring this test into line, it would very definitely struggle. But does seem to be a number of models that are like that are quite quite ownable to people having a first stab at this. And you know, going up the levels of things that are definitely more thermal hunting. You know, little pelicans and the like. Troopers. So that model type. And in addition, nice to hear about the acceptance of the examiners to find out what they finished in the day.
We're having sound problems with you.
Yeah,
again, Ron.
lost quite a bit of that, Ron. But yeah, but ultimately it'll be the examiner's decision whether he thinks the model, obviously a dialogue with the candidate, but it'd be the examiner's decision as to whether the model's suitable for the particular test or not. And if it isn't, the examiner will almost certainly suggest one of the other achievement scheme tests.
Sure.
Yeah. Any further questions, anybody?
Yes, Andy, I've got another one. Just looking through the 23 questions that we've all got to know all of the answers. Looking at question 10, which is what is the maximum legal operating height for a small unmanned aircraft and what is required before you can exceed it? Well, the handbook, the British Model Flying Association handbook 2018-2019 actually states on page 24, paragraph B, that models under 7 kilos are not subject to any specific legal restrictions in this respect of height. Yet the answer you're requiring on the test is 400 feet. Now, I appreciate there's a discrepancy there because there's a you know, what's it? I'm struggling for the word, I've forgotten it now. An exemption, that's the word, for under 7 kilos. But the answer, so if somebody asked me that question and I said, well, if my model's under 7 kilos, there isn't a height limit, would I fail that? Would I fail that question?
He would, because the handbook's wrong.
Yeah, well, the handbook's out of date, isn't it? 2018. The things have moved faster than the handbook changes, unfortunately.
But that's all that's available to people.
But it isn't. No, it isn't. There is an achievement scheme handbook. You have your standards booklets, all which have all these questions and the answers in, and the achievement scheme website as well. They're all on there. So I don't think anybody's gotten it. And again, anybody who's working towards a test will have probably discussed things with instructors and examiners who should have pointed him towards where these questions are as well. So, you know, I don't think... I'm not
disputing the questions, I'm disputing where you go and find the information to answer them.
Sure. Well, as Andy said, John, it is in all the achievement scheme documentation. But the handbook, as some of the regular viewers here tonight will know, is a bit of a hobby horse with me and the chairman. I've been lobbying for probably about 18 months now for the situation to be changed with the members' handbook because it's not right. The problem is the members' handbook doesn't have a formal annual review process like all achievement scheme documentation does, and that's what I'm trying to get put in place because it's the Bible for so many members, and as you quite rightly pointed out, it's actually at variance with their law at the moment. So it needs to change. So sorry, I'm glad you raised that, but it is. I'll get off my soapbox now.
I'm quite happy to have a conversation offline with this because I've found 2 or 3 other anomalies as well.
Yes, yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I mean, regulation has changed, you know, quite a bit over the past couple of years since the handbook was written, and unfortunately, as I say, without the handbook being reviewed on an annual basis, like the achievement scheme material is, we're going to get the occasional, you know, item like this. But just, I'm just going to share my screen again. I've just pulled up. This is the standards booklet for the silent flight electric test. You can see you've got the mandatory questions in there. They're all listed with the answers, and also on the Achievement Scheme website, we've got them all listed there as well. So we are, as I say, all the Achievement Scheme documentation is bang up to date. It's updated on an annual basis, more often if we need to. But people do need to be aware that the handbook at the moment isn't.
But just illustrating another point, question 2, your answer to question 2 is wrong as well. Because what you're asking for is how are the rules and regulations for flying established in law by Parliament?
Yeah.
Well, that's all down to going through the House of Commons, going through the House of Lords, first reading, second reading, committee stage, blah blah blah, down to consideration of amendments, and then the royal assent. That's not the answer that's in the handbook.
Well,
I think
you're asking what your answer is your answer is saying, where do you find the information once it is law? You need to rewrite the question.
Okay, we could take that on. I think yes. Okay, I take what you're saying, John. But yeah, that you kind of misinterpreted the question, but we can word it better.
Well, yeah, but if I can, then other people can as well.
Absolutely, no, absolutely, and we'll take the feedback on board and we can change it. That's why we have an annual review process, so that we can take on board things like this.
I'm sorry if I'm sounding to be a bit nitpicky.
No, it's absolutely fine.
Part of my previous job was proofreading about 6 different languages, so I tend to pick up on these things.
No, and that's good, and that's why we have this annual review process, so that we can.
As long as it helps people through the
test.
No,
it's a positive thing. It's a positive thing. But what really upsets me is the members' handbook has suffered through lack of, I don't know what the right word is.
Well, it's dropped behind, hasn't it?
Yeah, and do you know what? It always has, and it's a shame that it doesn't have the status that other documents have within the BMFA Council. I mean, we've got some other fellow council members on here tonight, and they will know I bang on about this at nearly every flipping council meeting. But what we need to do, actually, guys, is you all need to write to your MP. You all need to. Seriously though, if you drop an email to Ian Pallister, the BMFA chairman, it will help strengthen our argument, because we've been making this argument for quite some time, and the handbook is, as far as I'm concerned, it's such an important document, and it deserves better. It's one of the reasons why all the Achievement Scheme stuff was taken out of the handbook several years ago, and is now sits in the Achievement Scheme handbook. It was because we were having difficulty making the changes and keeping it up to date while it was still part of the members' handbook. Yeah. So we took it out and generated our own.
Can I just come in there? As a fairly new person on the hobby, my instructors have been telling me that the handbook is the Bible.
Absolutely,
And going through the Achievement Scheme things, I was told that the Achievement Scheme was actually wrong, because it should be as the handbook. So having heard, I would say that it definitely has to change in the handbook.
I think what we've got to accept.
People into the hobby.
Yeah, what we've got to accept with a handbook is that I think the speed that technology is moving now, which has then led to regulation change on a regular basis is probably not the right way, but more regulation change than we would expect. I think we're at a point where a handbook that's printed every 3 or 4 years is no longer appropriate. And I personally think we're at a point where a printed handbook isn't really appropriate anymore because of the pace of change that's required.
Is there a printed handbook?
There has been. We are sort of running down stock on that. The last handbook print was in 2017, and they get when they print the handbooks, they print about 40,000 in one go, and the new one goes out to every member as a new reprint enclosed in the BMFA News, and then when somebody then joins, a handbook would have been sent out.
It
Yeah,
was never sent out to me.
no, I'm saying that's no longer an appropriate thing because the handbook is out of date, you know, within 12 months now, and it will be every year going forward. So we have to, you know, get with it. It's one of the things that we're a bit behind the times with him. This is my personal opinion, anyway. It's not an official opinion, so don't assume that it is. It's one of the things where we perhaps need to be looking at purely an electronic version for the handbook, because we need to be able to change it, you know, fairly regularly. I mean, just as an example, this year there was potentially a wholesale changes or new regulation coming in at the end of this month, which now that's been put off. Which initially that was put off till November, and then it's been pushed back further due to the obviously the COVID crisis. But you know, and there was changes last year, and there was regulatory changes the year before that. So a handbook that was previously published every 4 or 5 years, it's just not an appropriate thing anymore, and I think we need to accept that.
Yeah, I think for me, Andy, the fundamental problem is there isn't a process within BMFA Council like we have for achievement scheme documents, which are controlled by the Achievement Scheme Review Committee.
Yeah.
There isn't that process within Council, and that's the fundamental problem. I agree with you. I think electronic format is the way forward.
I think
But
it's essential now, I think.
It's the lack of process within Council that I think is missing, you know. But anyway, we've got some other questions.
That's coming. Ian Nelson's had his hand up for a while.
Somebody in the audience mentioned before about learning the 23 mandatory questions. Can I just reiterate that you don't need to learn 23 mandatory questions for this particular test? You should only be looking, and your instructor examiner should be guiding you towards the pertinent mandatory questions, because you're doing silent flight A, you don't need to learn anything about FPV or multi-rotor or anything like that. So, you know, a discussion with the examiner where he's going to draw the questions from, he'll say from 1 to 10 and, I don't know, 20 to 23, whatever. But just be focused on, you don't have to learn all 23 questions for this particular test, or any fixed wing test, unless you're doing FPV or multi-rotor.
That is covered in the standards booklets, which says that it is expected that examiners will select questions that are appropriate to the test being taken.
Exactly.
However, candidates should familiarise themselves with all of the questions on the list. So, you know, and you can't know too much stuff in my view. So,
well, to me, it's new. If you're not going to be doing FPV extension, then it's nugatory effort to the candidate who will have enough, you know, enough on his plate, getting through the normal questions and the flight test.
Yeah.
So,
This
you know,
goes
it's a matter of,
back.
you know, when you do exams at school, you know, you're a broad spectrum, but you can actually narrow that down to what's going to be told.
Yeah. As I say, that what I read out there is what's contained within the standards booklet. So.
Yeah, but I know there are some examiners out there that are quite anal and will want to ask, you know, the ins and outs of duck's bottom sort of thing, just to, you know, be as they are. I'm being polite now, of course.
Not being polite, Ian.
You know me, Charlie?
I do.
Question from Ron again.
Yes, Andy. Just to go back to the sheets that you brought up on screen for some of the questions and the AS documentation. Can I just ask, because this is completely raw to the hear, are they all downloadable for Peru?
Yes, I'll do some screen sharing again. Just bear with me.
All of these sheets that you've shown with all the bullet points would be really useful too.
Yeah, if you should be able to see my screen there now. That's the Achievement Scheme website, which is achievements.bmfa.uk. So there's everything to do with the Achievement Scheme is on there. So you've got all the tests. You know, if you want to request club examiner assessments, download section there, and if you click on standards and guidelines, it opens up our cloud server, and you can download any of the standards booklets just by clicking on it and clicking download. Okay, so they're all there for you.
It would, sorry, it would seem that but by your admissions there, that these are probably more relevant to get your head round than a lot of
there's a lot of the stuff in the handbook is still valid, and this is the issue. It's just obviously things around regulations have changed quite dramatically, and a lot of the technology's changed as well. So I think it's vital for any candidate to make sure he reads the standards booklet cover to cover, because that tells him absolutely everything he needs to know. That's the silent flight electric certificates there. So that is your first point of call, in my view, is read that. Every candidate should read that, so they know exactly what they're being asked to do, and that tells them exactly what they need to know. But they do need to be familiar with a number of sections in the handbook, general model safety and that type of thing. The mandatory questions cover off all the things to do with regulation, which is one of the elements where the handbook is definitely behind the times.
Yeah. I hold a fixed wing A already, with a desire to get to a B at some stage. I was hoping this year.
Yeah.
Probably looking at it now. But the S being specific, as I'm supposed to be the guy.
Losing you again, Ron.
Yeah, sorry, I think my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, you've gone again. So, right, we have Robin had a further question.
Yeah, there's the reference to the maximum height, which I know what the legal limits are, and as long as your model is below 7 kilograms, you can go above using the exemption that the CAA and the BMFA have agreed.
Yeah.
But my club has one site within the local airfield's flight restricted zone. So we've negotiated and agreed a memorandum of understanding, and we're now limited to 900 feet for any model under 7 kilos. And can't fly anything over 12 kilos on the site.
Yep.
So I'd have thought that since that's so important with respect to the legalities, that a candidate ought to know that and not just quote the strict legal situation.
Well, that would come under your flying site rules and operating procedures, which can be asked about in the supplementary questions, of course. Yeah?
Yes. I think the other important point is, many years ago, the mandatory questions were part of the ordinary question bank anyway. That's an important point to make. The mandatory questions aren't anything new. Their formality is what's new, but they were always questions that examiners were likely to ask in the past anyhow. I think that's an important point to make. And as Andy said, site-specific rules will be an important part of the test as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the supplementary questions, they're there for the examiner to explore. They can be used to explore further some of the aspects of the mandatory questions. But local flying site rules is a very important part of that. That in your situation, I'd be very surprised if an examiner didn't ask, in the supplementary ones that.
Yes, especially given your location of that. That's
I'd be keen if I was taking a test at a club
Yes,
within
me too.
NFRZ. I would be.
Yes,
a few questions would be asked about it, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's all the type questions that we've got. Anybody else got any questions? No, it's all quiet in that case.
But yes, before everybody goes, please, I wasn't joking about the handbook. It has been a bit of an ongoing thing with BMFA Council for some time. And I'm also an area delegate, which makes me a council member. And I know Ian Nelson is, for example, and John Harris, who are on here tonight. What everybody needs to be doing collectively is harassing the chairman, because it's one of those classic things, if he doesn't get, if it's not causing him aggro, he won't respond. But as I say, the fundamental is there's a lack of, we don't have a proper process to review the handbook on an annual basis, and it needs to change. Unfortunately, as other people have pointed out, 90 odd % of it is right and is important, and we need to know it. It's just a shame that there are these inaccuracies in there that need to be corrected.
Can I just make one final point? And I made it at the last meeting as well. It's really important when the examiner takes the test, they get an overall feeling of the candidate. You know, some perform very well in one part, not so well in others. But the overriding thing is, if I would be happy there with my wife or my children or grandchildren on the flight line, that's usually a good indication. If the other side of that is I'd sooner put my mother-in-law there, then yeah, that's not quite as good.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, we have a question from Lek.
If somebody turned up with a powered glider and flew it in the power basic proficiency and did all the manoeuvres, would you automatically disqualify them, or would you allow them to fly it as a power model?
If it's a powered glider, it's not suitable for the power test, and the examiner would point that out at the time, I'm sure.
But for the power basic proficiency, a model that can't take off from the ground and the glider can't, it would actually fit into that. So at what stage do you now turn around and say, well, you can fly all those manoeuvres, and yet it's a strange, to me, a powered glider is a strange beast.
I sort of slightly disagreeing with Duncan here. If somebody turned up to me and said, can I take my air with this? If it the basic proficiency, obviously wouldn't be able to take an air test with it. Yeah. But for a basic proficiency certificate, if it flies the test, it meets the requirement, surely.
Yeah, that's true enough. I wouldn't argue with that. But what I would say to the candidate is, I think you should be taking the silent flight A. But yeah, I mean, again, it's examiner's discretion, Lek. It's a conversation between the candidate and the examiner. And we remember these things don't tend to happen in isolation. So the examiner the candidate would have been talking to the examiner long before the test, and vice versa. So it's not something that you suddenly present and it's neither party knows what's about to happen. But no, I mean, that would be my approach. If someone approached me with a power glider and asked to take a BPC, fixed wing power BPC, I'd say, really, don't you want to take the electric launch glider test or the power glider test?
But if it flies it absolutely superbly.
Yeah, but my question to you is, would you want to take a power test with a glider?
Just a question, as I said.
Yeah.
It's a strange beast.
Well, yeah, I think it's a bit hypothetical, but I also agree with Andy. If it's capable of flying the manoeuvres, then technically there's no reason why it shouldn't be allowed to do the test.
Yeah.
But I would encourage in that particular case, I would encourage the guy the other way. But,
yeah, I mean, it's pretty much going to be flown power on all the time. It's not going to be gliding at any point. If it was doing the BPC, is it really?
No.
So, but
a glider wouldn't necessarily need to be electric, though. You could have an IC
that's true.
glider.
It's true.
So,
in which case, it would be BPC rather than electric family.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually.
Yeah.
So, move on to a question from Tony H.
Yes, I was just going to bring Tony in.
Oh, and John's got his hand up as well.
Yeah, Tony, are you there?
Hang on, is that working? Because
yeah,
we can hear you.
Good. So I'm mixing the matches. I've missed a couple of your things. I don't know if this is the first one on Silent Flight, but are they actually doing air tests at the moment with the current rules that we've got COVID?
Yes.
Still doing them,
yeah. In fact, the day after lockdown, we was the first test.
Because I've been flying years, but not got me in. I joined a club to do with the purpose of doing either silent flight or probably a power air. But then the club kind of shut, says, go away. Well, no, they weren't rude, but they had to shut. It's opened again now, so it's something I can open discussions with then about.
Yeah, it's, obviously it's not situation normal and we're a long way from that, but you do need to consider beforehand what mitigation steps you're putting in place. But for the test itself, as long as the examiner's socially distanced, he's got to be 2 meters away. It's really not an issue. There shouldn't be any. You're probably a bigger issue is if you've got somebody assisting you, because normally in a test you would have somebody assist you, and that is where you've got shared contact surfaces. That's where your risk of infection transmission increases. So you just need to think about it a little bit more and decide what mitigation steps you're putting in place. But there's absolutely nothing in any of the rules that prevents the test from taking place.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
All right. John?
Yeah, Andy, it was just a quick one in terms of I do not have a large flat field that I fly gliders at. So pretty much my flat field gliding is done either at a thermal competition or at somebody else's club, like go down for a competition down at Baldock or something like that. Yeah. What's the situation when people don't have their home field and they need to organise a test? Is it a case of getting hold of the next nearest club and organising that and organising an examiner to come down to that site, or is there a different way of doing it?
You can, if you're aware of an examiner there, you can contact them to make the arrangements, or you can go through your area coordinator, contact the office. One way or another, we can get you in touch with somebody who can help.
Can just a conventional fixed wing power examiner or area chief examiner actually do the silent flight test, or does it have to be a silent flight?
The A test, yeah. Any examiner can do any A test.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. I think that's all the questions from the chat box dealt with. Nobody's hands up. Any final questions before we all go?
Just to let John Minchell know that I've made a note of that correction to the wording for question 2 of the mandatory questions. So that we'll carry. Well, no, it's good, John. We'll carry that forward to the next achievement review committee meeting.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll drop you an email with all of the anomalies I've found.
Okay, cool.